What if everything you know about Queen Elizabeth's death was a carefully staged illusion? For 45 years she ruled England with brilliance, ruthlessness, and an almost supernatural command over image. She was the Virgin Queen, the conqueror of the Spanish Armada, the monarch who transformed England from an island kingdom into a rising empire. That's the story you were told. But behind the silk gowns, jeweled crowns, and polished portraits, the truth was far more disturbing. By the year 1600, Elizabeth was 67 years old. That was ancient by Tudor standards. But showing weakness wasn't an option. Not for a woman who had survived assassins, rebellions, and Catholic plots for decades. Admitting frailty would have been the same as signing her death warrant. So she did what every great manipulator of power has done. She hid it behind a mask. Literally. Every morning, her servants coated her face with a thick layer of white paint mixed with vinegar, a toxic blend of lead and mercury that concealed the smallpox scars etched into her skin. But this mask of youth was killing her slowly. Her fingernails turned black. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her once legendary smile was shadowed by rotting teeth stained dark from years of sugar. By her 60s, Elizabeth was nearly bald, hiding her head beneath a collection of more than 80 wigs, each more elaborate than the last. The same cosmetics that made her look like a goddess to her courtiers were poisoning her from within. And yet, the illusion worked. In public, she radiated power. Every gesture, every word was rehearsed like a performance on stage. To foreign ambassadors, she seemed unbreakable. To her nobles, she looked eternal. But in private, the cracks were spreading. Servants whispered of tremors in her hands, her inability to sign documents without help, and moments when she spoke not to people, but to the portraits of her younger self hanging on the palace walls. Imagine that, the most powerful woman in Europe, alone at 3 in the morning, staring into the painted eyes of her past, asking advice from a face that no longer existed. This is not the story you learned in school. This is the unraveling of a queen, and the beginning of one of history's greatest cover-ups. Before we peel back more of this forbidden history, do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the secrets, the lies, and the truths buried in the shadows of history. Because what happens next in Elizabeth's life is darker than anything you've heard before. By the early 1600s, Elizabeth's carefully crafted mask was slipping. The queen who once terrified enemies with her intellect and charisma was now haunted by shadows, both real and imagined. Her courtiers whispered in corridors, servants exchanged nervous glances, and rumors began to spread that the Virgin Queen was no longer entirely herself. It started with sleep. Elizabeth, who once demanded late-night councils and thrived on long hours, suddenly refused to lie down in bed. Night after night, she insisted on sleeping upright, her body propped against cushions or even standing against a wall. When her ladies-in-waiting begged her to rest properly, her answer was chilling, "If I lie down, I shall never rise again." Soon, the palace walls bore witness to scenes more unsettling. Servants reported finding her wandering the halls at midnight, whispering to unseen companions, carrying on conversations with figures that no one else could see. At first, they dismissed it as exhaustion. But as weeks passed, the visions grew bolder. She began moving her portraits around the palace daily, claiming some paintings were watching her wrong or judging her choices. In 1 month alone, palace records show that her portraits were relocated 47 times. The queen was rearranging her own image as if she could bargain with time itself. Her paranoia extended to the dining table. Always a light eater, Elizabeth now refused entire meals, convinced her food was poisoned. She allowed only one cook to prepare her dishes, and even then, she demanded tasters chosen from courtiers she suspected of disloyalty. It was less about safety and more about humiliation, forcing nobles to risk their lives for every bite she took. Even her body betrayed her. Tremors shook her hands so violently she could barely sign documents. Her fingernails turned black, her lips quivered, her skin broke out in strange blotches. But the most terrifying moments were those when she seemed to slip entirely out of reality. She would spend hours staring at her hands, claiming she could see time itself moving across them like shadows. And then there were the gardens. Guards on night watch swore they found her outside at 2 in the morning, barefoot in her nightgown, searching for something she couldn't explain. When pressed, she whispered she was looking for her younger self, or worse, searching for where she had left her happiness. The image of England's eternal queen had decayed into something unrecognizable, a woman consumed by fear, hallucination, and despair. To her court, it was more than decline. Some began to whisper words they dared not speak too loudly: witchcraft, possession, divine punishment. But the truth was simpler, and far more terrifying. Elizabeth's mind was unraveling, and her kingdom with it. By February of 1603, the palace was no longer ruled by a queen. It was managed by men who were desperately trying to hold together the illusion of stability. Elizabeth's once razor-sharp mind was flickering in and out of clarity. Her courtiers began implementing what they called management protocols. In reality, it was a system to keep their queen under watch, like a dangerous patient whose condition could no longer be ignored. The breaking point came during a routine council meeting. Witnesses later recalled that Elizabeth, without warning, rose from her throne and began to dance. No musicians played, no singers sang. The music existed only in her head. For nearly 20 minutes, the ruler of the most powerful kingdom in Europe spun, swayed, and staggered across the chamber floor. Her court froze, horrified, too afraid to interrupt. When she finally stopped, breathless and confused, she looked around the silent hall and asked, "Why is everyone staring at me?" It was clear now, England's monarch was slipping beyond control. In March, she was moved to Richmond Palace. Everyone understood the truth. This would be her last performance. The official account insists she spent her final days in peaceful prayer, surrounded by loyal servants. But when you examine the evidence, the mask shatters. Lady Scrope, one of her closest attendants, recorded in private letters that Elizabeth was raging against the dying of the light, muttering to unseen figures, and refusing all food and medicine. Others claim she sat in silence for hours, her eyes fixed on the shadows, as if waiting for something only she could see. On March 18th, she clutched her throat and whispered, "I am not well." But here is where the story fractures. Robert Cecil claimed her final words were, "All my possessions for a moment of time." Lady Scrope insisted they were, "I wish not to live any longer." Another swore she said nothing at all. How could the death of a queen leave behind three entirely different versions of her last words? And then comes the most disturbing question. What happened between 3 a.m., when she supposedly died, and 11 a.m., when her death was officially announced? For 8 hours, the palace was on lockdown. No one entered. No one left. Only 6 people had access to her chambers, and they immediately prepared her body without an independent physician, without an autopsy, without witnesses. The official cause, old age and melancholy. Not a diagnosis, not even a medical explanation. Just a phrase meant to close the book. But the story wasn't over. Because in those missing hours, something happened. Something powerful enough to shape the entire succession of the English crown. The morning Elizabeth's death was announced, the cover-up was already in motion. Robert Cecil, her chief minister, moved with machine-like precision. By noon, riders were galloping north to Scotland with news of James VI's succession. The documents they carried were too perfect, too detailed. They didn't look written in response to Elizabeth's death. They looked prepared weeks in advance. And then, the silence began. Elizabeth's physician, Dr. John D., who had been documenting her mysterious symptoms for months, was found dead in his chambers 3 days later. Heart failure, they claimed. Convenient, for the one man who could have confirmed whether the Queen had been poisoned. Lady Scrope, whose private letters described Elizabeth's final madness, suddenly recanted. Her family's debts vanished overnight, and her son received a cushy court appointment. Witnesses who had been present at Richmond simply disappeared from the record, their estates absorbed by the crown. Even Elizabeth's chambers did not survive. Within a week, her rooms were gutted, tapestries, furniture, personal belongings, all destroyed or relocated. Cecil claimed it was standard procedure. But no such procedure had ever been applied to previous monarchs. It was erasure, pure and deliberate. So, what really killed Elizabeth? Historians still argue, but the theories grow darker the deeper you dig. Theory 1. Mercury poisoning. Her lead-based cosmetics were laced with mercury. Symptoms like tremors, paranoia, hallucinations, all match mercury poisoning exactly. Even her blackened fingernails are a textbook sign. And in 1999, during renovations at Richmond Palace, A hidden chamber was discovered containing bottles with traces of arsenic and antimony, poisons known to Renaissance assassins. The discovery was swiftly locked away, classified, and removed from public access. Why hide 400-year-old bottles unless they revealed something explosive? Theory 2. Assisted death. Coded letters uncovered in the 1980s between Cecil and his allies mention a merciful conclusion. Was Elizabeth, facing madness and a looming succession crisis, given a quiet, controlled end? Theory 3. Political murder. Religious extremists in her own court may have seen her death as divine opportunity. The suspicious 8-hour gap before her death was announced provided more than enough time to stage the scene, erase evidence, and ensure James's smooth succession. And then there's the Spanish ambassador's letter, written 3 days before Elizabeth's official death, casually discussing recent developments in the English succession. How could foreign intelligence know what was about to happen unless they had already been informed? Elizabeth's funeral was designed not as closure, but as distraction. The largest, most elaborate procession in English history drowned questions beneath spectacle. The people mourned, the world applauded, and the truth disappeared beneath velvet and pageantry. But the cracks remain. A queen who feared lying down because she knew she'd never rise again. A court that erased her final hours. A death that reads less like a natural passing, and more like the perfect crime. Elizabeth's reign ended not with peace, but with silence, and silence, as history shows, is the surest sign of conspiracy.